It's no secret that writing can be lonely work, but does it really have to be? Whether you're full-time, part-time, or just starting out, you'll get insights into the tricks, tips, and production habits of writers from every level of the biz. From best-selling authors to those launching their first novels, you're sure to be in the company of friends as we encourage great writers to divulge and share their secrets. This is the Great Writers Share podcast with your host, best-selling author, Daniel Wilcox.
Hello and welcome to the Great Writers Share podcast with me, Bailey.
And me, Daddy.
And Daddy.
And Daddy, sorry. Hello, yes, that was my son doing the intro, as this week I am a stay-at-home dad all week, as well as trying to manage work, which is lots of fun. So I'm going to keep this introduction nice and short, as I've got 1,000 things that I need to be trying to get to and juggle at the same time, which I'm sure you guys can appreciate. But just to give you a little bit of some of the usual intro, today is the 7th of April as recording. My guest for today is someone who lurks around in the background of quite a few Facebook groups. He's someone who you'll know if you're in with all the self-publishing formula guys. It is, of course, T.W.M ASHFORD, or Tom Ashford, who runs the Self-Publishing Spotlight podcast and does a lot of the blogging and everything for the SPF guys. In today's episode, we talk about transitioning from writing prose to telling a good story. So we go quite a lot into how you know the moment of when you're able to write good prose, but how that transcends later into being able to tell a good story. He talks about how he got involved in the SPF podcast and lessons learned from that and those guys over there, and curating a strong brand, and talks a lot about going into a soft relaunch of his books, which is a similar position to where I'm in at the minute, in which you almost not discount what you've done in the past, but look at a clean slate in terms of the books that you can put forward in the future using the lessons of what you've learned before, which I think is really interesting, and we go quite deep into that. Going to quickly look at last week's question, which was how do you incorporate exercise into your writing. Holly Line, HB Line, got in touch and said she likes taking control of her ability to exercise by having her equipment at home. It's made it much easier to incorporate regular exercise into a daily routine, and it helps me come to my writing grounded and motivated. Thank you, Holly, for sending that over. I am not going to do a question for next week, just because I haven't had the time to think of one at the minute, so please forgive me. This episode is brought to you by all my wonderful patrons over at patreon.com/greatwritersshare, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get access to a bunch of extra bonus stuff. You can get all your episodes ads-free, you can get early access, and you can get just loads of extra stuff over there. So if you fancy getting some of that good stuff, jump over to www.patreon.com/greatwritersshare and get involved. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to dive into the interview with the one and only Tom T.W.M ASHFORD. Enjoy. Tom Ashford, also known as T.W.M ASHFORD, is a British novelist. He lives in London with his American wife, not far from where he was born. He's written hundreds of scripts and copied for some of the biggest companies in the world, and previously published articles on games and films. He has been known to play a bass guitar on more than one occasion, and sometimes well. Of course, his main passion is writing fiction. His books include the Blackwater trilogy, the Checking Out series, and numerous standalone adventures. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
No worries, I'm excited to have you. We were chatting a little bit about this just before we came onto recording, but just in general, how are you finding the environment with the wonderful coronavirus at the minute?
Oh, it's a joy, isn't it? It's an absolute joy. It's interesting because I think as writers, a lot of us have been, self-isolating on a regular basis anyway.
Yes.
So from my perspective now, my wife's working from home, and I'm less self-isolated than normal and more distracted.
Mm.
So, but health-wise, it's all fine.
Yeah, I find that interesting because I'm very similar in that I work at home a lot. Oftentimes I go out into town and just get a bit of fresh air or whatever. But when I was first going into sort of doing a lot of this full time, my ex at the time was sort of in and out of the house a lot, and I found that incredibly distracting. But being alone was helpful. I know you mentioned you've been distracted. Have you found ways to get around that distraction to make sure that you're still getting your work done?
My wife's pretty understanding in terms of let me just sit down and write. So it's not too bad in the evenings. During the day, we just try to use different rooms. I mean, we live in London, so different rooms is a luxury in the first place. But yeah, it works out.
What's the vibe like in London at the minute?
Sorry. Oh, the vibe.
Yeah.
Quiet. I mean, I haven't gone out for a few days. My wife went down to the local shop today, and somebody walked in and asked one of the staff, like, "Oh, I'm pretty ill. Which kiosk should I use?" And was very aggressively shouted out of the store.
Wow.
So I think it's a mixed bag, a lot of emotions.
I think it's interesting how much reinforcing it takes for some people to actually get that message that it's a serious thing and people can all play their part to actually make it better in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah. But switching into a bit of your writing, because obviously you're a writer and this is a great Writer Share podcast. Tell my audience a little bit about how you got started into writing and pretty much a summary of your journey to today.
Sure. So I've been into writing for many years. Back in school, I really enjoyed doing it, but it wasn't really something that I ever thought of as a career or even as something that I take, like English literature or something at university. I did history and film. But I always kind of wanted to write a book. And when I moved to London to become a copywriter, I just sort of thought, well, this is the time that I should be doing it. If I'm employed to write and use language, I should use this time to try to actually be a writer. So I wrote a book. It took me about a year, and it was rubbish, so I immediately scrapped it. Wrote another book, probably took me about 9 months, and it was rubbish, but I released it anyway. No, it's all right, but it's not the greatest book ever. And I've just kept writing ever since, really. And now I've got 10 books out. I'm kind of doing a soft reboot, as it were, of my writing career, where instead of writing for me and doing passion projects, I'm kind of looking at it as a career and sort of writing to market and taking a sort of commercial view of the whole thing.
And what was your bar to success in terms of publishing when you first started? I mean, you said it in your own words, in your own opinion, your first book wasn't good, but you still published it anyway. So what were your parameters that you were looking at before you thought, yeah, I'm just going to put this out there and get this journey going?
Well, I mean, I'm always quite harsh about everything that I do. Like, if someone asks me, like, "Oh, do you think this book of yours is good?" I'll go, "Yeah, it's fine." I'm not one of those people to big it up. So when I say it was rubbish, I mean it's okay. But now I look back and I think, I probably would try to develop the story more or something. It was very thematic and that sort of thing, but a bit too literary, but probably without the actual experience to back it up. But in terms of, I guess, parameters to success, I don't know. I guess I just felt like it was a completed story, that it was fleshed out enough, that it did what I wanted to do. And I think it's quite a philosophical book. And at the time of writing it meant quite a bit to me. So I don't want to get too detailed with that, because it's a bit of a doom and gloom story. But it was important to kind of release it and to go, I've achieved something. I've put it out there, and it was a catalyst to writing all the other books. Because at the time, I just thought, I'll just write a book. Then I've ticked it off the bucket list, and then after that, I was like, no, I really enjoy this, and now I've written one, I can write 100.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something massively important about just getting to the end of a book and actually putting it out there that propels you forward. Because, like you say, once you've done one, you know what the whole process involves and how you can actually move forward and do the rest of the books that you want to do. Have you found that writing books have gotten any easier since that first one, or is it still quite a tricky process for you?
Oh no, it's definitely easier. So whereas at the time I was writing maybe a few hundred words a day, and I had time to write more, but it was just a very slow and I guess challenging process. Whereas now it takes me about 3-4 months to write a book. If I don't feel any sort of like, there's no mountain to climb for it. It's just a case of sitting down and chipping away, getting 1,000 words done a day, and just getting a book out in 2 or 3 months, and then doing the revisions an extra month, whatever. And yes, it's a lot easier.
And I'm assuming that your process has changed quite a lot in those 10 books from book 1 to book 10. What are some of the biggest changes, obviously if there are any, that have come your way while working on these?
Aside from learning, I mean, obviously we'll probably cover it, but apart from joining SPF and learning about all the marketing side of things and looking at it more like a business than a hobby, I guess just kind of learning more about the craft. Because at the beginning it was, I was fairly strong, I guess, with prose, but not necessarily with storytelling. And so over time, I've learned more about what reader expectation is, and I guess plotting as well. I did plot the first book out, but not necessarily with a great guide in mind, I guess. Like using the hero's journey, that sort of thing. I was more just, this is what I'm going to write about, rather than actually going, this is why this scene is there, this is why this happens later on, or that sort of thing. So I guess, my approach has fairly matured, I guess, or developed as I've gone.
You've put something into words there that I've always struggled to actually put into words myself, something you've alluded to, which is the transition from just writing good prose into being able to tell a good story. And that's something that, the minute you said that, that sort of triggered thoughts of my own journey in different books that I've written. At what point within your journey do you think, or which book specifically maybe, do you feel like that switch flipped, and how did that feel in terms of the actual process of writing for you?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would say probably when I was writing books 8 and 9, they were sort of sequels to a passion project that I'd had a while back, and I was writing them, and I thought they were good, they were entertaining, but they weren't really targeted at an audience or anything. It was just kind of like, oh, this is fun for me. And there was a kind of realization towards the end of that whilst I still think they were good, they've got good reviews, still proud of them, it wasn't necessarily going to actually sell. It wasn't going to be like a viable approach going forward. And the book that followed that, the 10th book, which, kind of rounds off the my first bulk group quite nicely. I think it's a well-written book. The reviews have been very good again. But again, it was just a philosophical based fantasy story that appealed to me, and I wouldn't know how to begin marketing it. So it was kind of around that time that I'd already been floating the idea of writing like an ongoing space opera style, action adventure style series, because that's what I'm passionate about, and that's also what lots of other people are passionate about, and you can target that audience. And I guess when I started writing that, and I found that I was actually enjoying writing that more than I'd written any of the other ones, which meant that my story was actually going to be better for for me, for the reader and everything. So I actually ended up writing a better book than any of my older, I guess you could say, more pretentious books or more like winged books, whatever. I mean,
the reason that resonates with me is I'm pretty much in the same situation at the minute, in which I've written a lot of books that have been, I guess, passion projects of mine, just things that I thought I'd enjoy writing. And I'm now at the point where I think I recognize more of the tropes and more of the genre-specific conventions that I'm trying to get into. And I'm about to launch into a bit of a project myself, which I'm hoping will hit some of the stuff that you've just discussed then, in terms of reader expectations and just making sure it gets to the right point in the market. It's just interesting. Like I say, that's never been voiced in that way before. And one thing you did mention there as well, and something that is definitely going to be, I think, informative in our conversation as well, is you mentioned obviously your connection with the self-publishing formula guys. I think it's probably worth just giving a little bit of a nod about how you got involved with all of that and the kind of work that you do with Mark Dawson.
Sure, yeah. So I'd been sort of lurking. Well, for those who don't know, self-publishing formula, they offer courses about how to establish author platforms and market your books, basically, becoming a successful indie author. They also have podcast that goes out each week. I do a whole load of content on the YouTube channel, the blog, and another mini podcast as well called Spotlight. And there's a really big Facebook community group where loads of writers can share sort of tips and techniques and general advice. So it's really, it's generally really useful for you, even if you're just going to come along and join and learn from people. And that was basically what I was doing at first. I was kind of lurking in the background of this big Facebook group of like 12,000 people or something at the time. learning what I could. And eventually, after about a year and a half of just lurking and not really even posting anything, I saw a post from Mark or James saying that they wanted somebody to run a blog for them. And I was looking to kind of, I've been in the same job for, same copywriting job for about 5 years. And I was looking for a change anyway. And so I applied for it, went through the whole process. They offered it to me. It was part-time, so I stayed in my previous job, but then just did that in a couple of evenings each week, which was really, really great. Got me close to the guys, got me close to all the sort of material as well. And then after about 5 months, they asked if I just wanted to come on full-time and do a whole load of basically content creation across the board, which was, fantastic. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a spot that a lot of people will be enviable of, particularly people who know the kind of work that goes on over there. Jumping back a little bit into the part-time stuff that you did, how did you find managing that kind of work around a full-time job and also trying to manage your own fiction? Were you still writing at that point as well?
I was still writing. It was brutal. To be honest, I really pushed myself at that point because I was working 9 till 6 in London. So I got home at I sometimes left a little earlier than that, but I got back about 6:30 each evening on a Monday, and a bit of Tuesday, depending on how much work there was. I would work until about midnight on SPF stuff, and then it was basically, I guess, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, but to a more reasonable extent, just working on my own writing in the evenings. And still trying to fit in a couple of hours of just sort of chilling out time on top of that. But those months were, it was busy. It was very, very rewarding though. Mm. So when I say it was brutal, I mean that in a self-imposed and obviously fortuitous. Yes. Fortuitous way in the end. So yeah.
Yeah. And how did you find? How did you manage to keep pushing yourself, particularly at the points where maybe you were absolutely shattered, maybe, you just really felt like you didn't want to get up onto the computer and do that little bit of extra? How did you continue pushing yourself?
I guess it was the same thing that made me sit at the computer and write every single evening and for chunks of the weekend for the 4 years before that, or however long it was. In terms of my own personal writing, it's just that sense of you keep at it and eventually something will pay off. It's that sort of, I guess, delayed gratification sort of thing. Because obviously when you start sitting down and writing a book, often people's first books can take them, like I said, like a year or something, because they're not used to it. And just getting 300 words down a day is a challenge because you don't know if it's crap. You have no idea. But you have to just do it every single day. And if you don't do it every single day or as near enough as possible, it doesn't happen. If you just go, I'll write when I feel like writing. I mean, some people perhaps, but for the vast majority, if you sit down and write when you feel like writing, you will never write a book because it's
Absolutely.
just, or you'll be one of the, someone like David Mitchell or something who writes a book every 4 years, and it may be fantastically written, but realistically, only one David Mitchell can exist as an author, because most literary fiction can't sustain an author for a career. So you do need to be able to sit down and write constantly, and then eventually get faster and faster to the point where you can release, maybe 1 book a year or maybe 3 books a year or whatever, but you have to sit down and write. So I guess it was the same sort of approach for the SPF and my day job as well. I had to go to the day job, otherwise I wouldn't have rent. So that was a guarantee. And then, working for, I wasn't going to stop my own personal writing. So that wasn't really, I guess that went down a little bit, but it was a worthy payoff because working with, the SPF guys, it was still is a little bit surreal because, I still remember seeing the podcast every week and being like, oh yeah, there's James and Mark. And then one day just meeting James for a lunch in London being like, what is happening?
No, there's something to be said, I think, for taking opportunities and just following the trail of wherever they lead, and letting go of any expectation of what you may or may not get. Like you said, you weren't sure that it would lead to anything in the long run. You were doing part-time, and then obviously it has led to this fantastic opportunity for you where it's all sort of come to fruition and
Yeah.
yielded a lot of advantages.
Yeah, and I should also point out that I'm in a fairly lucky position. I've got a very understanding wife who, like I said, just lets me get on and write and doesn't mind too much if the dishes stack up for a night. She will kill me. But I also don't have any kids, which is, I think, the real difference. I mean, obviously, a lot of people probably hear me going, "Oh, I did a day job like everyone else, and then I did a bit in the evening, and I also had 5 other days in the week to relax and write or whatever I want." Probably thinking, lucky git. Like, I've got 2 kids to look after and the same amount of work. So, it was brutal in a sense. I just gave myself a lot of responsibilities and kept pushing myself. But, there are people who managed to get books out with much worse, but much more challenging conditions.
What are some of the biggest takeaways that you've taken from working full-time with the self-publishing formula, guys? I mean, obviously you'll be privy to a lot of the courses and all the education, but are there any particular things that stick out for you?
I guess the work that goes on behind the scenes, and obviously I would say this because I'm doing the work behind the scenes, but genuinely, there's a lot of people who, for example, let's take the self-publishing show, for example. There's 7 people that work on that in terms of different things, because you've got, obviously, Mark turns up and is the face of the whole thing and does the interview. What does the top and tell with James? James does the actual interview. There's a guy called John who edits the whole thing. There's Catherine, who some people might remember from the self-publishing show Live. It's been briefly mentioned. There's me, there's Stu, there's at least somebody else that I'm forgetting. There's a lot of people who go in, do a lot of stuff behind the scenes just for that one show. And then you've got to think, well, there's running the blog, there's the YouTube channel, there's another podcast, there's all the communications, making sure the courses are, maintained, and having to go through the courses and, you get the idea. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, which you don't necessarily see when you're just lurking for a year and a half in the background. But also the passion, I guess, because everyone is genuinely really passionate about it. It's not like, I don't think there's anybody in the entire team or even the community really who's just doing it. I mean, obviously everyone's doing it for the money, but no one is doing it because they just go, "Oh, it's an easy way to make money," because obviously it's not. If you want to be rich, go work in a bank. It's like Mark's obviously great writer, and he's also very, very lucky. He's got a brilliant career out of it. But James and John do it because they also love doing it. It's not just like a way, this is a business that's going to make us loads of money. It's genuinely just something that they really, really enjoy. And I think that passion shines through. I hope it does.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Do you wish you'd been a bit more vocal in the forums before you actually got on board with the guys, or are you sort of happy with how things ended up?
I guess probably, yeah. And I would recommend that anybody who wants help or with anything to do with their books, or even if they don't think that they need any help but want to get things, things like blurbs and stuff like that checked, should definitely, reach out to the community and find out what other people's thoughts are, because you can think that a cover, for example, is really, really good because either you've worked on it or you've paid somebody else to work on it. But until you actually show it to people, you don't really know. And and I'm used to writing copy, for example, so writing a blurb isn't too hard for me. But I guarantee that if I just try to write my own blurb and I didn't show it to anyone, then I will miss things out that other people will just be able to sort of step away with a bit of distance and go, "Oh, you really shouldn't be focusing on this. You should just mention that." So yeah, I do kind of, I don't regret not doing it because obviously things have played out pretty well. But I do think that, I could have made more of the opportunity.
And of course, you guys had your first ever SPS Live in London just a few weeks ago. I mean, it's the 25th of March as we're recording. I'm not 100% sure when this is going to air, but it'll be a few weeks from today. And a lot has changed in that time. So you guys just missed the wave of coronavirus in the UK. So congrats on that.
we were riding that wave, I think.
And James even wore a hazmat suit, if I'm correct, from the social media that I saw.
Yes, he did. It was a real one as well. He had it from his old BBC days.
Fantastic. How did you find running or being in sort of the background of one of the largest publishing or independent publishing events in the UK?
I think for James, certainly, and I'm sure Mark and John also had this to quite a large extent, but fairly stressful. I think showing the stress. I mean, things ran really smoothly, I think, on the day. And I think in a lot of ways, things felt more smooth than we expected on the day. But there was constantly stuff going on in the background in terms of like, at one point we had Amazon who were going to come on and speak, and then they pulled out, and then other people pull out. And it's all very reasonable. We were very understandable. But it does mean that the last few weeks you're running around like headless chickens, not really knowing how things are going to play out. And I guess also for the 2 weeks before, we weren't sure if it was even going to happen. So that was fun.
Yeah. There's something about events. I mean, my previous job, I used to work in marketing, and I had to run a couple of the university's freshers fairs, which was, we'd have anything from 5,000 to 10,000 people come through the door during the day. And the whole, the one thing that I found of that was like, there's so much tension in the lead up, and then on the day, there's nothing else you can do but just let it happen. So a lot of that tension does go, and you actually do allow yourself a moment to breathe a little, enjoy it, and just run with it. What were some of your highlights from the event itself, and maybe some of the talks?
I mean, at the time, I didn't actually get to see a lot of the talks because I was in the green room, basically eating pastries, and essentially just making sure that everyone was going out. But again, it ran really smoothly, so it wasn't really a worry. I mean, the sessions were fantastic. I think Mark and James have mentioned this on our main, SPS podcast. But Joanna Penn's session went down really, really well, and I've watched it since with the digital ticket that's available, and it really is really, really in depth about the different ways that you can basically diversify your income. Other than that, I guess also we had a boat drinks afterwards, which was really fun because we just ended up sailing up and down the River Thames, and the Tower Bridge opened up for us. And yeah, I mean, that was absolutely fantastic. So like with a lot of indie author events, I think the networking is very valuable. And there wasn't a huge chance to network at the actual show because we were trying to fill, a short amount of time with a lot of information. But the boat was really good for that.
Sounds fantastic. Jumping back a little bit into some of your writing and some of your books, one thing that did jump out to me when I was doing my research and looking at your books that you've got so far and all your collections, your cover art is absolutely beautiful, and you can definitely tell that you're spending time trying to curate a brand for yourself. Nice. How are you approaching the actual branding of your own products?
Well, amazingly, I did actually do my own covers for them. So I'm very glad that you liked them.
No, they're fantastic.
The tip for that, I think, is simplicity, which Stuart Bache also mentions whenever he's on book lab episodes and his course and things like that. Just finding like one strong image that works with your book. If you're not amazing with Photoshop, I've learned a bit more since. I can do a bit more like blending of different images. But if you don't know a huge amount about cover design, just find one strong image and get good with typography. Because even if you get a good image and you have a bad bit of type, it's going to look amateur. But essentially for mine, in terms of branding and maintaining that, and I'm carrying on that branding in terms of my author name and things like that to the new series. It's just finding a font that works for your name and that just generally encapsulates the genre or style of writing that you're going to be using moving forward, and just replicating that from book to book, really. I don't think I've really had much in the way of cross-series branding, other than just keeping my name the same font and in the same place. And then obviously within individual series, you want to maintain that sense of branding, and don't use too many fonts. That's the little design tip, just generally. Just stick to one or two fonts. So in terms of, a film poster, that would be, you have your big font for the title, and then you have the font for all the different like director name and actors' names and stuff. And then for a book, you have your title font, and then you have a second font for your author name. And that should basically be it.
Yeah, and the images you've chosen are very, very striking, and quite a few of them, particularly because I've got them in front of me at the minute. The Blackwater trilogy, the individual books, they all have that very movie poster feel to them. Is that something that you were going for specifically, or?
Yeah, I guess so. And that is also reminded me of the other things that I deliberately used the same source for my images. So they are all
Yes.
done by the same illustrator. So that does also probably help with the branding. Though the last book and a couple of the others don't have that same illustrator. And so hopefully they still kind of fit. I can't remember your question. I'm really sorry about that.
The movie poster effect.
Oh, yes. I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm a big film buff, and I think also movie posters, I mean, people have a short attention span these days, and I think movie posters obviously have to compete in a very expensive market, much like books. So I feel like if you can do something that a movie poster kind of does, you're going to grab someone's eye. Though there still is that, as again Stu Beige points out, the familiarity theory. You want to make sure it still kind of fits within the genre. I'm not sure if mine do. Mine may fall onto the fancy, looks nice artwork rather than the genre specific artwork. Which, to be fair, also one of the shortcomings of my books, as much as they might entertain people, they're not necessarily genre specific, as I mentioned before. So it's quite hard to be like, oh, this is a horror and also a fantasy and also a supernatural thriller. And to reflect that convincingly in a piece of artwork. So I think just making something look good can certainly help to just grab people's attention if you don't know necessarily what your who you're targeting in the first place.
Yeah. I always have mixed feelings about the recommendations for cover design sometimes, because obviously there is an expectation of what a genre is looking for. But at the same time, I know that when I'm looking for books, often it's the ones that are different that catch my eye, that draw me to thinking that I might buy that book. And particularly traditionally published books tend to not follow those same sort of genre conventions. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How do you reconcile that in terms of, I know you said yours are a mixed genre, but is that ever sort of...
I mean, when I've done marketing in the past, which obviously, as all indie authors must do, it certainly hasn't been a problem to get people to buy the first book in a series or anything. Because so I think there probably is something in what you've mentioned in terms of standing out. I guess the other thing is also that if everyone is doing the same thing that everyone else is doing, because that's what's successful, like there's women's fiction always has, it always seems to have a silhouette of a woman with a bun, like her hair's in a bun, and it's this. And then a sort of cursive writing, and so many books just have the same thing. And so whilst there is an element of, you follow that, you're going to fit in, and people are then going to identify what genre you are and hopefully go, oh yeah, well, I'll like that because I liked this. If you have something that stands out, that can also be a valid way, I guess, to grab people's attention because you aren't following the same trend. And I guess every familiarity theory trend, it has to start off with somebody doing something different. But I guess if you're looking at it from a commercial point of view, it's probably the risk reward may not be as great to stand out as much as follow the trend. But it depends on what you're going after, really. Different people have different results.
How do you approach advertising with a mixed genre novel?
With great difficulty, I would say. It's not straightforward. It's kind of why I've decided to kind of, as I said, soft reboot my indie author career. And whilst I will still be using the same pen name and I will still have those books out there and I'm still very proud of them all, I want to be able to target a specific audience. And having a book that is, 3 different genres and not necessarily all fitting, not necessarily having a huge crossover between them, it doesn't necessarily lead to great read-through, because whilst you may get lots of people buying the first book, which is the case I've found. At one point, I even made a profit through Facebook ads on a 99p first in series for a short while, because I was getting like 9p a click, and then 1 in 2.5 people would buy it. So I was making more money than I was spending even on the first series, but it's just not really sustainable, because if that dips beyond and then people aren't, dips below and people aren't necessarily, going through to books 2 and 3, because, if you might pick up the book and go, oh, this is great, I'm really enjoying this, but I was kind of looking for a straight up horror, for example. So I'm probably going to spend $3.99 on a horror book that I definitely know is going to meet what I want, rather than $3.99 on a book that was really good, but it wasn't what I was looking for. or in the mood for.
Yeah.
So I feel like jumping between genres can be tricky. So it's certainly not what I would recommend. So I mean, people obviously say if you genre hop, that doesn't exactly spell great success for you as an author, unless you can write a lot of books under different pen names, etc. But like if you've got one pen name and you're jumping between thrillers and horror or thrillers and romance or something, that's going to cause problems because your audience they're not going to melt together very nicely. So imagine doing that within the same book, and you can see the problem that can arise if you're not very well trained, I guess, in mixing genres.
I love the idea of that term, soft reboot, and I'm actually smiling because that's literally, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that's the exact same situation that I'm in. I've got a backlist of books that I'm proud of. They've done what I wanted them to, but they're sort of scattered all over the place. Whereas I'm now sure of my direction and I'm able to see what it is that I want to put in and the kind of projects I want to be working on. I guess a lot of people would look at that as if you've almost wasted time in putting out these products that obviously aren't your true calling. But at the same time, I guess the argument could be made that you need to go through that journey of discovery in order to know what it is that you want to write, learn the lessons that you need to write, and start putting out the books that are what is going to be true to you and your brand.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, definitely. You could look at it like that, and I think I probably have looked at it like that a couple of times, feeling like, that was 4 years of time that I could have been making money. But like you said, if I hadn't written that, then I wouldn't be where I am now in terms of my writing. My storytelling wouldn't be as good as it is now. It would still be as good as book one, which wasn't, which again I'm proud of, and it's well written, but it's not a captivating story in the way that you would probably hope to, write in commercial genre fiction. And I feel like if I was starting my sci-fi series now, and it was my very first book, any mistakes that I would inevitably make would be with that book. It wouldn't be with book 11 that, where I'm not making those mistakes. Those mistakes wouldn't be with, an early book that kind of shows my journey across the years as I develop as an author. It would just be my first product that I'm then sort of stuck with because I've got this ongoing series that all has to spread out from it. So, on one hand, it's 4 years where I could have been writing books that made money, but it's also 4 years where I was doing something I really enjoyed. I'm really proud of it. And most people across the entire world in most industries don't get to do something, or they don't get to create 10 books or 10 films or anything that for a hobby, let alone make money. So I don't really see it as wasted. I mean, people spend lots of money and lots of time on cars, and that just costs them money, and it's nowhere near as creatively rewarding. So
definitely
not too bothered.
One thing that I was worried about when I looked at becoming a full-time author was that I'd worked in a position before for an old job where I basically turned a passion into a living, and found that actually sucked quite a lot of joy out of it. I feel quite lucky at the minute because I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and that hasn't happened in this case. But has that ever been something that you've been worried about?
No, I don't. Not particularly. I think there could definitely be a lot of stress involved with being a full-time writer, and that being your sole form of income, because then there's a lot of pressure. Like I've been able to write 10 books because it doesn't matter if they don't sell a single copy, because I'm just writing it for me. But if I was writing it to make money and then I didn't sell any copies, that would be terrifying. So, there's definitely the idea of it being a stressful thing. But then, of course, if you're sensible, you're not going to quit your 9 to 5 to become a full-time author unless you've got good sales coming in and hopefully a good parachute behind you in case something terrible happens. So, no, I've not been too bothered by that. And I guess because I've been working a full-time job, either, with my old job or with SPF or whatever, I've always been writing in the evenings on my own time. And so if I didn't get some sort of creative reward out of it, whether I felt obliged to do it, as, on many days I do, because you just got to sit down and write, then I just wouldn't do it. So I guess it's just that, but suddenly you're doing it full time. Hopefully you still really, really enjoy it, as well as it being a kind of an obligation to yourself and to your readers, I guess.
What do you do to unwind?
Video games.
Nice. Any particular favourites?
I've been playing through the Uncharted series recently, or replaying through that. BioShock, I think, is the greatest game of all time.
Oh, okay.
Which, interestingly, James Blatch, he classified that while he was working at the BBFC.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, that's a little bit of information.
Little tidbit. Yeah, I downloaded that. Well, I bought it from Game a couple of weeks ago, just before they gave it away for free on the PlayStation Network. So I lost out on that one, but I'm yet to play it. I've heard good things.
It is the greatest game of all time.
Okay.
I will hear nothing to the contrary.
Fair enough. We are coming up to the end of time on my questions before we go into some of the Patreon questions. But I have one more question for you, which is, why do you write?
Because I've always needed to have some sort of creative outlet, would be the short, easy answer. I guess when I was in sort of school, so Americans would be high school, secondary school for UK, I was in like bands and things like that. So it was very much I wanted to express myself musically. And I already knew I liked writing, but, who could write a book back then? Writing a book was impossible and there was no way you're ever going to get published anyway. So why set about doing that when you're 16? So I just, loved music. Then when I moved up to London, I was much more like, right, this is the time to write. So if I didn't have some way to express myself in a creative fashion, I think I would just be massively depressed and just sort of sitting on a couch doing not a lot. And some people really like just coming in from work and sitting down and, just unwinding. And there's nothing wrong with that. I kind of envy people who can just do that because it's fun and you've got lots of free time. But I just feel like if I'm not creating something, I feel quite antsy and that I'm sort of wasting my time. So there's got to be an outlet, and now that I've kind of found my rhythm of writing, it's definitely that.
Beautiful. I definitely feel the same. I'm one of those people. It's taken me a long time to reconcile the fact that I can't sit still. Yeah. I have to do something. I get very, very edgy if I'm just not doing something. But yeah,
if I haven't written like 1,000 words in a day, I feel guilty sitting down in front of the TV.
Yes. Oh man, the devils we have on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Okay, going to go into the Patreon section now. So got some questions that were sent over by patrons over at www.patreon.com/greatwritershare. And the first one is, what is your favorite place to write?
It would be probably my usual place, which is just on my desk with my nice comfy chair. That's nice. Pretty much it, really. But equally, I mean, if I can do it in a cabin in the Alps or something like that, then that would obviously be fantastic. I think going and seeing different locations and writing in different locations can inspire you. But also, like I've said multiple times, you just got to sit down and write. So find somewhere comfy and quiet in your own house and make sure that's the best place to write, I guess, because that's where you're going to be doing it.
Do you have any particulars in front of you or around you when you're writing? Do you have any like tokens or talismans?
No, I don't. But I do like to write, because I write in Scrivener, at least of the the first and second draft and stuff. I like to put that into composition mode and have like either a sort of image behind it that's relevant to the scene, or the cover art or something like that, just to set the mood.
I didn't do that.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And it blocks everything else out because it's full screen. So it's just your manuscript and scene setting imagery, and that's it. I also have a Spotify playlist that is about a day and a half's worth of just random film soundtracks in terms of sci-fi movies and stuff like that, which just gets put on shuffle. And it blocks everything out except for the image, music, and then writing.
Nice. Is that a random one that you stumbled across, or did you build that yourself?
I built it myself, just from whatever site. I mean, there's no, there might be a Star Wars soundtrack on there, but there's nothing too iconic that I would be like, oh, look, this is Duel of the Fates. It's got to be stuff like from Arrival or Gravity or something like that. That kind of just sets the mood.
Do you find that you constantly have to fine tune it? Because I've got a horror one that I've built, and occasionally a soundtrack will come out and I'll dump the entire album in there, and it won't be until, I don't know, 3 weeks later that you suddenly hear one track and there's just a bit too much sort of vocal in the background, and you just have to remove that.
Oh yeah, if there's any vocal, I don't have it on there. I can't write with lyrics on there, which I don't know if that's from being in bands and stuff like that, or if it's just like a personal thing. Because some people, like I know Mark has like, he listens to like all sorts of like metal bands and rock bands and stuff like that in the background. And
couldn't.
I can't do it. Can't do it. The words would just end up on the page. I can't.
Fantastic. What would your profession be if you weren't a writer?
Copywriter. I honestly don't know. I have no idea. And I spent a long time before I became a copywriter trying to work out what career do I have. Because I left uni and I did a first year in history, decided I didn't actually want to study history, did film studies, which is not great for careers, to be honest. Anyone who's thinking, oh, I should do that as a career choice, don't do it. It was a great course though. But yeah, I came out of that and I worked in like Curry's, like a PC World, sort of I guess, Best Buy style sort of Target shop or something in the States. I don't know. Just like a store for a while, worked in a chemist, did some training as a teacher at one point. Well, not training, but, like experience as a teaching assistant, that sort of thing. And all the while just writing and doing like gaming websites on the side and stuff like that. And that was obviously where my passion was. But again, how could you make a career out of it? So I don't really know what I would be doing if I wasn't writing, because I legitimately don't know.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. One of my favorite questions: how do you reward yourself when you've completed a project?
Ooh, champagne or prosecco. If you're not making any money from your books. Champagne, get a Domino's delivered in or something. Watch a movie.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. Thank you very much to the patrons who sent those over. We're going to go now into the quick fire round. So I'm going to throw 10 questions at you as quickly as possible. Try and reply as quickly as possible. If any of them stump you, you're able to pass, and it's all just in good fun. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Cheese or wine?
Wine.
Godzilla or Mothra?
Godzilla.
Do you own a cravat?
No, but I have worn one once.
What's your worst fear?
Probably heights.
What was the last book you gave up on?
I never give up on books. To be honest, I never do, but I almost gave up on Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, I think. But I persevered. But that's the nearest one.
What's your favourite part of London?
Soho, I guess. Yeah, let's go Soho.
Oregano or oregano?
Oregano.
Favourite fictional realm?
Rapture.
Best birthday present you've ever received?
Ooh. I am stumped. I'm going to have to pass on that one. I can't even think.
If you could live in any decade across humanity's existence, including the future, which decade would you live in?
Given that you can't tell how bad the future might be, coronavirus might have wiped us all out, I'd go with 1920s.
And on that positive note to end it, one bonus question. Where can my listeners find out everything about yourself and everything that you're working on?
It'll be my website, www.TWMASHFORD.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the show, Tom. It's been a genuine pleasure.
It's been absolutely fantastic to be on it.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you next week. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the Great Writers Share podcast. Next week, I'll be joined by the one and only thriller author Tosca Lee. Don't forget you can get early access to every episode of the Great Writers Share podcast and the chance to ask upcoming guests any of your questions just by becoming a patron of the show. All you need to do is visit www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share and support the show for as little as $1 a month. One more time, that's www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share. Until next time.